Welcome to another video on my channel. Today we're going to talk about a subject that has been causing a lot of buzz on social media, incestuous marriages in A Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones, as most people know it, and in the new series House of the Dragon. I know it may seem like a controversial topic, but let's try to approach it with humor and informative manner, without neglecting the historical and cultural importance of these practices. What are incestuous marriages? Today we're going to talk about a topic that causes much controversy in TV shows, movies, and real life, incestuous marriages. But first things first, what are incestuous marriages? Well, basically when two people from the same family marry each other. This can include siblings, cousins, uncles and nieces, for example. It is important to note that although in some times and cultures incestuous marriages were common, nowadays this is considered illegal and morally condemnable in many countries. This is largely due to health problems that can arise when two people with a high degree of kinship have children together. But getting back into fiction, who here is a fan of Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon? If you've watched these series before, then you probably know that incestuous marriages are recurring themes throughout their history. One famous example is Cersei's relationship with Jaime Lannister, twin siblings who have had an intimate relationship since adolescence. This forbidden relationship is one of the main elements driving tension between characters within Game of Thrones plotline. Another example would be Daenerys Targaryen potentially marrying her brother Viserys. In Targaryen culture, it was common for siblings to marry each other so as not dilute their bloodline purity. However, this marriage also caused many problems for Daenerys throughout her story arc. In House of the Dragon, the new HBO series set in the Game of Thrones universe, incestuous marriages are also expected to be a recurring theme. After all, the story takes place during Targaryen times where it was known for siblings to marry each other so as not dilute their bloodline purity. But why are incestuous marriages so common in TV shows and movies? Well, partly because these forbidden relationships generate tension and conflict between characters, which is fundamental for good storytelling. Furthermore, incestuous marriages can also be used as a way of exploring themes such as power, betrayal, incest and even forbidden love. After all, who hasn't fallen in love with their friend's sibling before? Just kidding folks, that's very wrong. However, jokes aside, it is important to remember that in real life, incestuous marriages are considered morally condemnable and illegal in many countries due largely to health problems that can arise when two people with a high degree of kinship have children together. So what do you think about this topic? Have you watched any TV show or movie that deals with incestuous marriages before? Leave your opinions and suggestions down below. Incestuous marriages in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now let's talk specifically about those somewhat inappropriate family relations within A Song of Ice and Fire. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, then you probably know by now that the series is based on George R.R. Martin's books called A Song of Ice and Fire. If you've read these books, then you'll know that incestuous marriages are recurring themes throughout its history. Let's start off with Cersei and Jaime Lannister, twin siblings who have had an intimate relationship since adolescence. This case of incest is one of the main elements driving tension between characters within A Song of Ice and Fire plotline. But it isn't just limited to Lannisters having an inappropriate relationship within A Song of Ice and Fire. In fact, the story is full of incestuous relationships. For example, Targaryens who have a lineage marked by marriages between siblings are also known for their cases of incest. Another example would be the relationship between Greyjoy brothers Euron and Aeron. They don't have an intimate relationship, but their family relations are still quite complicated with tension and power struggles. But why are incestuous marriages so common in A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, partly because author George R.R. Martin likes to explore controversial and polemic themes within his work. Furthermore, these incestuous relationships can also be used as a way of exploring themes such as power, betrayal, incest and even forbidden love. But of course all this takes place in a fictional universe and should not be taken as reference for real-life situations. In any case, it's important to remember that incestuous marriages are considered illegal and morally condemnable in many countries. Even within fiction, these relationships must be approached with responsibility and sensitivity. Incestuous marriages in House of the Dragon. It's time to talk about another controversial and twist-filled topic in House of the Dragon, incestuous marriages. If you're not familiar with the series yet, House of the Dragon is a spin-off of Game of Thrones that takes place 300 years before the events of the original series and follows the story of House Targaryen. And, as you may already imagine, House Targaryen is famous for its cases of incest. In fact, it is precisely this that gives rise to many conflicts and power struggles throughout history. The first case of incest in House of the Dragon is between King Viserys I and his own niece, Rhaenyra Targaryen. This relationship is quite complicated and ends up generating many tensions and power disputes among family members. But it's not just them who have cases of incest in House of the Dragon. Other characters like Daemon Targaryen and Rhaenyra Targaryen also have romantic relationships with close relatives, making the story even more complex and intriguing. And just like in A Song of Ice and Fire, incestuous marriages in House of the Dragon are also used to explore themes such as power, betrayal, forbidden love, and even madness. But it's important to remember that fiction should not be taken as a reference for real life and that cases involving incest are considered illegal or morally condemnable in many countries. Anyway, incestuous marriages in House of the Dragon are a fascinating theme full twists that will surely keep fans glued to their screens. Historical and cultural importance of incestuous marriages. Did you know that incestuous marriages were once common across various cultures throughout history? That's right, this practice isn't exclusive to either A Song of Ice and Fire or House of the Dragons. In fact, in some ancient cultures, incest was even considered a divine practice, such as in ancient Egypt where pharaohs frequently married their sisters to maintain the royal lineage. But why did this happen? Well, in many societies, marriage between relatives was seen as a way of maintaining the purity of blood and avoiding dilution of the royal lineage with foreign blood. Additionally, marriages between relatives were also a way of keeping wealth and power within one family's hands. However, it's important to remember that nowadays this practice is considered illegal or morally condemnable in many countries since incest can cause severe genetic problems for offspring. Therefore, it's essential that marriages are made between people who aren't closely related. Despite this fact though, the history of incestuous marriages is fascinating and full of twists just like we see in A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon. In fiction, this practice is used to explore themes such as power struggles, betrayal, forbidden love and even madness. And while the practice may be condemnable today, understanding its history across different cultures helps us better understand our own culture and history. Conclusion. Well folks, I hope you enjoyed this video about incestuous marriages in A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon. It's a controversial topic, but one that has cultural significance throughout history. If you like this video and want to see more content like it, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Also leave your comments down below so we can continue discussing on such an interesting subject. Until next time. If you liked the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll stay here until next time.